partner of LightBox. And I'm joined by my colleague Alexis. Do you want to chime in and say hello?
Hello, I'm Alexis Weiss. I'm the managing partner of LightBox Collaborative, and I will be helping with the tech stuff today, so running things behind the scenes, but happy to be with you all.
Alexis and I are really privileged to work with hundreds of organizations across the state and across the country, all working towards social justice. So we work on a wide range of issues, from LGBTQ rights, immigrant rights, racial equity in education, you name it. We've worked on a wide variety of causes, and we are super excited to be here with all of you today. We have a long history of working with the Fund for Santa Barbara, and we're delighted to plug in and be with all of you today. We'd love to invite each of you to introduce yourselves in the chat. We'd love to know who you are, the organization you're representing, and especially your relative comfort working with the media. Some of you might have lots of media experience serving as spokespeople. You might have trained members of your organization as spokespeople. Some of you may have been a journalist in a different life, but would love to just hear a little bit about the media experience you bring into today's conversation, because that's really what we're going to be focused on today. We're going to be talking about the sort of the role of engaging with media in advocacy work. And we're going to be talking a little bit about how the media is evolving very rapidly right now. And we're also going to be talking about sort of what does it take to pitch and place a really successful news piece or a news package. So those are some of the things I'm going to talk through today, but would love to be able to attune that to some of the questions or levels of experience you all have. So I'm seeing some ranges here, right? Some of you have served as marketing coordinator, moderate experience with the media, experience working with and creating media, which is fantastic. I love to hear that. So we're going to give you some ideas, hopefully, that will support that, and maybe plug in with what you already know, and maybe give you some new ideas and tips and tools as well. So super excited to have you with us today. I do want to say that we're a small group today, relatively, so I would love for folks to just chime in with questions. If I'm going too fast over something and you want to slow me down and ask some clarifying questions, that is also much appreciated. So feel free to jump in, come off of mute, and let us hear you on the mic if you have questions or want to drill into a particular topic with more depth. I'm here for it. So with that, I want to actually ground us in a communications model that we use. This is, yeah, some of what we're going to cover here today. We can go to the next slide. Because before we get into the ins and outs of media, I want to just sort of situate the role of earned media in our advocacy strategy. At Lightbox Collaborative, those of you who've come across us in the past, you may have heard this is a model that we use to sort of craft high-level strategic communications and communication strategy for advocacy organizations, right? In order to have really effective communications, you need to know what is it that you're trying to achieve, right? That goal. What is the change we're trying to make in the world? And then we have a question of audience. Who is it that we need to engage in conversation in order to achieve that change? And then once we're really clear on who we're talking to, right? What are their motivations? What are their hesitations? Where do they get their information? What are the messengers they can trust, right? We really got to get our heads around our audience to effectively engage them. We can then start to think about messaging. What's the messaging that we want to convey to our audience to engage them toward our goals? And we're not going to talk a lot about messaging today. We spoke about it last time we were with y'all, but we think about messaging as sort of a strategic and persistently delivered set of ideas, values that will help open up your audiences, right? Turn on their ears, open their hearts, and open them to what you have to say and sort of the persuasion goal that you have in order to help create that change in the world. And once we've got our messaging straight, then we've got to think about our engagement, right? What are the platforms, the channels that we're going to use to deliver our messages to our audiences in order to motivate them to our goals? And so it's these four elements that really create a holistic communication strategy for your advocacy effort. And I think it's important to kind of ground us in that, because if we aren't clear on our audience, sometimes we don't know what earned media is going to reach them, right? If we aren't clear on our message, we might not be creating or pitching the sharpest media story. And so I want to make sure that all of our conversation today is grounded in a really a clear understanding of communication strategy, and then earned media becomes an extension of that. Let's take a look at the next slide, because earned media isn't the only type of media we might be using to reach those audiences, right? So once we think about where our audiences are getting their information, we can start to think about the most effective communications channels or platforms to reach them. So many of us, we have a robust owned media component of our work, right? We have a website for our organization, a blog. We might be doing IRL activations, tabling at events, right? Those are the kinds of places where you have direct control over the message, and you can kind of be reaching your audiences one to one. The same is true in paid media, right? You have control over the message when you're paying for those banner ads or your Google ad phrases, when you're paying for a billboard, or when you are buying an ad on radio or streaming services. You actually have more control over the message when you're paying for it, right? The challenge is you got to pay for it, right? So those platforms can be expensive to use. Many of us are also thinking about shared media platforms, right? So your social media, your digital content, word of mouth, referrals. You might think about influencer partnerships in the shared space, right? So those are places where you're essentially borrowing somebody else's microphone, or you're borrowing the platform. You don't have total control over the message because you're in conversation much more directly with your audiences. And earned media is actually the pillar of communication where um, we have the least control over the message, right? Because we're relying on third-party journalists, editors, maybe it's a podcast host, right? We're relying on some third party, and we are literally borrowing their microphone in some of these cases, right, to talk to broadcast news. But it's mediated, right? We're relying on how an editor or journalist or podcast host shapes the story, how they edit the piece. And so we're relying on somebody else's reach, right? So that's the benefit. Some occasionally these platforms have much greater reach than our own media platforms might have, right? The local news probably gets a lot more eyeballs than your website on any given day. But you gain that reach, but you exchange some sense of control for how the message is delivered to your audiences when you go to these shared or earned platforms. So I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind, right? We are clear on our goal, we're clear on the audiences we want to reach, we're clear on our message, and the platforms or channels we use to engage our audiences in conversation give us varying degrees of control at varying degrees of cost. And so I think that's just a really important thing to think about in your advocacy strategy, right? Many years ago when I first started this work, sometimes people would talk about earned media as like, oh, it's great to do because it's free. Well, I actually know you have to work really darn hard to place those stories. So I think of it as earned media, not free. But in the cases where you are able to build relationships with journalists and be in conversation with them, it can be a way to get your issues covered in platforms that have some significant reach at a relatively low cost. Again, it's the person power, right? There's some time associated, there's some cost associated with your time and the energy you're putting into it. But it can be a lower cost, higher lift, but lower cost way to get your messages in front of your audience. So I think that's just a really important high level consideration as you're thinking about which communications platforms to use, is recognizing you're exchanging some degree of control when you go into the conversation around earned media. I think it's probably helpful for us also to orient a little bit in our understanding of what's happening in the media landscape these days, because it really is changing fast, and it's changing. It has really big implications for our strategy, right? How are we making those choices between earned, owned, shared, or paid media? So I think let's do a deep dive into what is the state of media right now. We're in a place where more people are getting their news from digital sources, right? So from social media or digital first outlets than they are from traditional sort of, some people call it legacy media or traditional long-term media outlets. And we're in a place where we just have a proliferation of media out there available to us. I don't know anybody who feels like I'm not getting enough access to information. That is not our problem in today's world. So we have this sort of like rapid amplification of the number of outlets, and those are increasingly becoming hyper specified. So we have niche outlets that cater to specific interests, specific political views. We have hyper local and independent outlets. We have ethnic and community media, right? So there's lots of sort of different I don't want to say tiers, but almost like landscapes of media that are being covered, right? Different heights or breadth that are being covered in all these various niche outlets. And because we have all these niche outlets, we have smaller and more fractured audiences. So audiences are becoming increasingly attuned to information that is really tailored for them, which means we have to really think more carefully about our audiences, right? We have to really do that deep strategy work to understand that the ways we're going to reach and the ways we're going to message to, young men who are getting their information from the manosphere is going to be really different than the ways we're reaching out to maybe our base audiences or allied organizations or decision makers and elected officials, right? There's really sort of this fracturing in where audiences in how and where audiences are getting their information, and that's training us all as news consumers to be attuned to the things we most want to hear, right? The things that are most familiar to us. And we call this the filter bubble, right? We're all living inside our own filter bubble, because we are being trained as media consumers to consume that increasingly niche style of content. And I think it's worth noting that this is all happening at a time when typical newsrooms are increasingly under-resourced. And the journalists who remain in those newsrooms, right, there have been tons of cuts, but the journalists who remain in those newsrooms are increasingly being asked to do more and more with their time. So journalists are not only, writing the article or producing the radio piece, they're also increasingly being asked to produce social content that wraps around it, that moves into other channels. Their jobs are looking more and more like ours in many ways, right? Like many of us as communicators have to be a jack of all trades and produce all this different kinds of content. Increasingly, journalists are being called upon to operate in those same ways. So one of the things we can think about when we think about our earned media strategy is how can we make that journalist's job easier? Right? Not because they're not doing it well, but because their job just got a lot harder. And so the ways we can think about packaging our stories or connecting with them in ways that make their jobs easier increase our likelihood of being placed in those news outlets. I think we also have to really be thoughtful about the implications of corporate ownership, and what that's doing to erode journalistic norms, right? So that's not only cuts to the newsroom, but it's also increasingly we're seeing corporate owners take editorial control of their outlets, right? We know Jeff Bezos at the Post has done away with the opinion section. We know that the LA Times corporate owners blocked their endorsement in the 2024 election. So the sort of hard and fast walls between ownership and editorial that we used to experience, those things are eroding. And I think we need to take that account into our strategy as we're pitching and recognizing that some outlets just won't pick up certain things anymore. I think there's sort of becoming a vicious cycle where these newsrooms are eroding. They have fewer and fewer journalists, and that the corporate standards are also causing more journalists to walk away, right? Many journalists are walking away from traditional outlets and instead migrating to Substack, where they have their own kind of mini channel, right? So in some ways, journalist by journalist, we're getting niche news outlets as well. What that means is it's actually becoming easier to build relationships with some of those journalists who are migrating to Substack because they are in direct communication with their audience. But what it means is that for many of those folks, their reach is not what it once was at some of these larger outlets. So I think these are just some of the things to keep in mind. And of course, we recognize that we live in an age of misinformation. And so that the sort of mis and disinfo, the AI slop that's out there, all of these things are contributing to a broader erosion of trust, certainly in the online space, but also to an increasing degree of traditional and legacy media as well. So, we have all these rapid changes happening in the state of media at the same time that people are less and less trusting, even of, what once was kind of gold standard news sources in our communities. So it's a tough crowd out there, right? It's a tough environment out there that we're operating in when it comes to earned media. So all of those caveats, just as a way to prime our thinking on how we can do this better and more effectively for our causes. I want to talk a little bit about sort of the state and the local landscape in the county as well, just to really ground you in local context. So, California as a media market is massive. We actually have 12 major media markets in the state, which is more than any other state in the country. And so what that means is that sometimes even for statewide stories, you have to have a local angle to break through in your local media market, right? So it's not just, a statewide story, which in Nebraska is a statewide story and everybody's going to carry it. Each California media market is going to carry it a little bit differently. So really be thinking about what's the local angle on a particular story. How can you bring that local flavor to a particular story, whether it is you have people who have been affected locally by the issue, whether you have local spokespeople, local family stories, really thinking about what are the implications for our local budget, right? Do we have local leaders who've played a statewide role on this issue? Really thinking about how you can bring that local angle to any given story or conversation is going to help you break through, given how competitive and tough California media markets are. And I also want to say that ethnic media is a huge opportunity for those of us who are operating at the community level, right? We have across the state really robust Spanish language, Vietnamese, Chinese, Korean, Tagalog. We have just have sort of an embarrassment of riches when it comes to ethnic media outlets. And to the degree that your work is relevant to, serves, touches those communities, you should absolutely be thinking about looking to break through to ethnic media. Often they're really hungry for stories that are relevant to their communities. And they can be sometimes much more accessible, right? They're easier to connect with, easier to build relationships with in some cases. Obviously, if we're talking broadcast, you probably want to have in language spokespeople if you're looking to connect with radio or TV in language. But most of the print journalists are going to be bilingual and might be able to speak to English speaking spokesfolks who will then translate for their outlets in print or online. So things to think about for ethnic media and the sort of statewide landscape overall. Let's take a look and go hyperlocal when we think about some of the statewide outlets. So just this is just to give you, I don't need to sort of name every outlet in the state, but this is just to give you some for examples of some of the key media outlets in each of these categories across the state. The other thing I'll say about California, we are lucky that we don't enjoy a lot of news deserts, which is what that graphic is showing you. There's only one county in the state that doesn't have local news outlets. That may be changing as we see cuts to public broadcasting, right? So we've traditionally been a very media saturated state, but that may not be the case forever. So I think that's worth naming. So we have the other thing I'll say is that California has a lot of digital native outlets. So Cal Matters, LAist, Berkeley side, right? Some of those more hyper local or hyper focused, policy niche kind of publications that are digital first. They still can sometimes be as tough to get into as some of the more traditional legacy outlets. So worth noting. And then I also want to just name, we have some local media resources too, to offer you, and I can drop some of this in the chat. We have, in Santa Barbara County, you have a number of hyper local and community sources that I just want to speak to. I actually put together a worksheet on it to give you a set of tools and resources. So I'm going to drop that in the chat so that you have it. But you have, user-driven community news platforms like EdHat, which focus on like at the neighborhood level, public events, public discussion. I think about them as breaking micro stories that might be missed by the larger dailies or radio. They've also been voted the county's top local website for a number of years, so they're worth looking at. Obviously, there's TV Santa Barbara, right, for community and public media. Again, more hyper local kinds of reporting. For local ethnic and Spanish language media, you have some great resources, right? You have Tu Tiempo Digital based in Santa Maria. You have Amigos 805, which is digital first, but covers culture, events, community news in language. You have Radio Bilingüe. And Kathleen, I know you mentioned you have a partnership or a relationship with them. Do you want to chime in about how you've worked with them?
Yeah, absolutely. So Radio Bilingüe is one of our partners with the Stop the Hate program, which I think some folks on this call are also partners in that. But yeah, they do an amazing job with mostly radio, but they've got some print stuff on their website. And they provide news and information in Spanish, English, Mixteco, Triqui. So it also includes indigenous languages as well. And they've got stations throughout the Central Coast and into more of the inland areas as well.
Great. Thank you. That is a great question. What is the county that lacks media outlets that I see in the chat? And if I had my glasses on, I might be able to read the map. But the graphic is so small, I actually need to refer to a map of California, and I promise I will. I can do that as a follow-up. But north, very, the northern part of the state is where we start to get a bit more rural and a little less saturated. So let's talk a little bit about the kinds of press hits right now that we're thinking about our media ecosystem locally and statewide. So let's talk a little bit about just the kinds of stories you might be trying to place in earned media, because not all stories are created the same. Right? Many of us think about that sort of juicy holy grail of a feature story, right? That really covers your work in a robust way. It really maybe, it profiles your leadership or some of the members of your organization. Right? But we usually think of a feature as a deep dive, and it's a really juicy hit when you score it. Exclusives are something that you are pitching on an exclusive basis, so limited access to one choice outlet as a way to really secure their investment in the story and build that relationship with the outlet. Sometimes you might get called for an interview, right, to react to local breaking news, or to react to things that are developing on your issue. That interview might result in kind of a deeper dive story, or you might simply get a quote or a mention in that story. Sometimes we can be called upon to provide background to a journalist, where we're helping them understand the contours of the issue, but we aren't necessarily named or mentioned, our organization's not mentioned, or our spokesperson's not quoted in the story. The value of that is that it really helps you develop relationships with those journalists, with those reporters, because they're looking for credible sources they can trust. And if they start to turn to you as somebody who can provide the background that helps them understand an issue, it means that they really see you as a source, and they're going to keep coming back to you again and again. We can also think about press hits that are more of the opinion variety, right? So we can submit an op-ed to a print or digital outlet where it's a first person, right? It's written in your own voice. It's your own opinion and your own take on the issue. Letters to the editor are a smaller, more bite-sized version of that. So there's lots of ways that we can think about leveraging earned media from different angles, right? And interviews, of course, also applies to television or radio coverage as well. So there's lots of ways on all kinds of mediums that we can think about earning media coverage for our causes. Let's go to the next slide. And I want to talk about kind of the essential ingredients to place a story, right? Many of us think about, there's this sense of like, serendipity about media placements, and I can tell you that that is not the case, right? You've got to have some sort of core ingredients to really bake the recipe. And the first of those essential elements is news. You have to have something that's newsworthy, and I'll talk on the next slide about what makes something newsworthy. But you've got to have sort of an idea, an issue, a story that really rises to the element of being newsworthy. If you are proactively placing media or you're proactively doing outreach, you need to have a really strong media list, and we'll drill into what that looks like as well in some of the subsequent slides. You have to have a tight pitch, right? And we're going to give you a tool in this session that actually will help you craft a pitch tailored to a journalist, right? It's not sort of this like one press release and everybody's going to come clamoring to my story, right? The best practice is to tailor your pitch to the outlet and to the audience they serve, to the particular angles that journalist might like to cover, right? So you've got to think about having a really tight tool to pitch that story and place it proactively. News stories do not happen by accident. They are shaped and placed proactively. And these are some of the essential elements to help you get there. You need spokespeople, right? You need some humans in your news story. And so the more you have sort of well-trained, well-prepared spokespeople who are comfortable telling their stories, who are comfortable giving their opinions on the issue, and who are, who feel like confidence and practiced in that, the more journalists are going to keep coming to you. And then you also want to have some supporting materials, right? That might be a two-pager, that might be a report, that might be, it might be some, like maybe you've done some research in your organization, right? Whatever background is going to help round out the story for that journalist is going to be really useful for you to think in terms of your news package, right? So I do want to encourage you to think about the ingredients of a news package. B-roll or audio clips might also be useful things that round out your package of media materials, right? If they don't have the ability to send a camera out to you, do you have great footage that you can share with them to help round out the story? So those are our elements, and I want to now kind of drill into these one by one. So if we think about we talk about news, that's the core ingredient here. You've got to have something new. Right? So one of the ways we think about helping you take advantage of your media moment is to really be clear about why now, right? What's going on that is timely, and why you. What is it that your organization has uniquely to say or contribute at this moment in time? And what is your proximity to the action, right? So, what is the action that's happening? And how are you situated relative to it? How is it affecting people in your organization, in your neighborhood, in your community, right? How proximate are you to where news is being made? And if we're thinking about photojournalism, TV, there needs to be something to see, right? One of the things that is a critique for all of us in the nonprofit sector is that sometimes we'll hold a press conference with a bunch of people standing behind a podium or a lectern. That is not the most exciting visual, right? The more we can think in pictures and really get out into our communities and think about events that show our communities in action and think about events that show the impact of things in our communities, those are going to be more visually compelling stories. Cliff, I see your hand. I'd love to hear from you.
Yes, so this is a response to your comment about B-roll. I've had lots of discussions about whether if we do B-roll, let's say we have an event with the public, can we show the public's face in our B-roll? Yeah, I guess I'm concerned about the privacy issue with showing people who are at a rally, for instance, holding up a sign. Can we show their faces or not?
I've seen organizations use both practices. So I've seen some organizations in their digital channels blur people's faces if they have a privacy concern. I think the reality is that if a news camera were showing up to your rally, they would not blur it, right? That if you invite the news to come to your rally, the expectation is that those folks are going to they're acknowledging they're at a public event, and they can expect that their likeness would be used when you bring the news media in.
Okay, I'm thinking specifically. I have been asked to provide photographs for a TV station who couldn't cover our event, and I was concerned that basically I was giving them permission to show the likenesses of the people on television.
I think that if you are asked to submit photos, you should, in fact, you should be clear with the folks who are at your events. Hey, we might be sharing some of these photos with the media. If you don't want to be in photos, cover your face or stand to the back or stand behind the cameraman, right? Take yourself out of the shot if you don't want to be seen.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Kim, I see you have some questions on this as well.
No, just some comments. One of the things that I've seen, I saw SPCC do this for the first time a couple of years ago. And what they did is, and so I think Indivisible Santa Barbara, I think you might mention it in your email that maybe attending this event has no expectation of privacy and that there are photos. So I thought that was very effective. And I'm also seeing more institutions doing that on their campuses. So I know that's not what this is about, so I'll shut up now.
No, but it's a great practice, particularly at a time where I know many of your organizations are really thinking about, we're thinking about immigration and we're thinking about ICE raids and we're thinking about protecting folks in our community. So I think these are exactly the right kinds of privacy considerations and expectation or level setting to be doing around your events in that context. So really appreciate these questions. Yeah, yeah. So let's talk a little bit about news hooks, right? So these are ways that you can sort of increase the news value of your story if you're trying to pitch and place a media story. Right? We want to know human interest, right? What are the human elements, human impacts of these stories? News lives on controversy, right? They're always going to want to show sort of two sides of conflict in a story. And I think sometimes organizations who are advancing a particular cause or point of view think that if they've covered the other side, we haven't done our job well. Not the case, right? News thrives on controversy. They're going to try to show both sides of a story. And so, know that that's an expectation when you go into earned media coverage, that they're going to be trying to elevate that element of controversy. We talked about localizing the story as much as possible. The opposite is also true, right? You might have something so juicy happening in your local community that you want to begin to pitch it to statewide or national outlets. So thinking about how sort of news works vertically in that way across geographies. Trend stories. Somewhere along the way in the newsroom, 3 became the magic number of examples to show a trend in action. And so you might pitch a trend story if you're seeing, certain things begin to have sweeping impacts. Show me 3 families who are affected by this. Show me 3 elected officials who've taken a position on it, right? And suddenly we have a groundswell or a surge of support. Research, right? We love our numbers, particularly in the policy space. And so if you have research backing that relates to your issue, that can also just be one more news hook that helps elevate the news value of the story. Media also loves superlatives. Is it the first? Is it the largest? Is it unprecedented in some way, right? Those superlatives help dial up the news value of your story. We talked about the importance of visuals, right? Thinking in pictures really, really does help. Calendar hooks, right? Anniversaries, holidays, and we've this week was the 80th anniversary of the Hiroshima bombings, right? So we've seen a lot of news coverage of that. So just be thinking, are there calendar hooks you can be using, right? Is there an awareness week or a famous leader who has a birthday, right? In the time frame you're pitching your story. Anything you can do to add a calendar hook can also help. Do you have a fresh or an unexpected angle, right? Do you have a hot take that's different than the conventional wisdom? Do you have a spokesperson with a controversial point of view? That can be a way to also up the news value of the story. If you're responding and reacting to breaking news, right? Your organization might not be at the center of a story that's breaking, but if it's relevant to you and your leadership has a commentary, that can be a great way to insert yourself into a news story or a news cycle. We think about celebrity, right? If there are sports stars, well-known local leaders or local, sort of community fixtures, those can all be ways to increase the news value of the story. So thinking the way I think about it is like the more of these I can squeeze into a pitch, the more compelling my pitch is going to be. So that's just a way to think about how to leverage those news hooks. Let's go to our media list, right? So we've got to think about who are we pitching our story to? And again, we're thinking about proactive pitches here. So in some ways, thinking strategically about where you want to pitch becomes the most important step of preparing that pitch. What are the outlets that will deliver your message to your audience? And in this age of media proliferation, right, you may have some choice and some discernment here. And so you may also want to be thinking about prioritizing your list, right? I'd really love to place this story here, but if they don't bite, then I'm going to move on down my list to other outlets that might. I think one of the best ways to build a really smart media list is to become a media consumer, right? Watch the news, listen to the radio, read what's happening in the paper, right? Surf around those digital outlets. But the more you consume the news, the more you'll get a flavor for who's covering what, and from what angle. And that can be a really important tool. And as you do that sort of media consumption, I think the right thing to do is to then begin to keep a media list. So let's hit the next slide and talk about what goes into a good media list. You want to have something that is more than a collection of post-its stuck to your computer monitor, but maybe not more complicated than a Google spreadsheet, right? It doesn't have to be a really complex database, but you want to have some kind of list where you're tracking who are these journalists, what outlets are they working for, what role do they play, right? Are they an editor? Are they a journalist? Are they, what sort of, where are they? How do you contact them, right? Email. Most people like to be pitched by email. Most people are not answering their phones these days. If you have their social media handle, pay attention to them on those platforms, right? Follow them. And you may, some journalists don't mind being contacted on social. Others, not so much. So you might have to sort of learn your journalist preference there. But also in your media list, keep notes on the last contact your organization had with that particular media contact, right? Did we pitch them unsuccessfully 37 times? What makes us think the 38th is going to be the magic one, right? Or did we have did they give us great coverage last year, but we completely forgot about it, but we want to remind them that we appreciate it and we want to build on it, right? So having those kinds of notes can help you keep that relationship really connected. The other thing I want to drop in the chat here is that the Fund for Santa Barbara happens to have a handy dandy local media list, which Kathleen, thank you for sharing in prep for this conversation. And so I'm dropping it in the chat for all of you as a starting point for some of your own media work, right? So you might make a copy of this list and keep some localized notes on your organization's last point of contact with them. Terry, I'm seeing your point in the chat around false info. I'm curious what's the context of that? Do you want to come off mute and say a little more?
I noticed that in some platforms, there and I don't know if that's in all social media, that some of the stories aren't credible. Like if you go into their comment sections or you read through it, it's like, oh, false story. And like some of the bites, I have to say, I'm like, is this real? So my context of knowing who's credible and following them is how to pluck them out. You know what I mean? So for me, I find that's harder because I'll start speaking on a story and be like, are you kidding? That's not real. And being gullible, that's why I'm here. I have some experience, but I'm that gullible person. So I want to see if there's ways I can pluck that out on my own. It's probably huge, but I don't know if maybe you have some suggestion on how to know how credible they really are.
It's a
Because
great
I don't want to spread false information either, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah,
So
we live in an age of mis and disinformation, right? And so knowing what and who to believe can feel like a
right,
challenge sometimes.
right,
I would say most of the, all the sort of mainstream outlets that I've been naming or were in that slide,
right.
those I feel like you can be confident in. I also feel like some of the local digital first, Cal Matters is an great source, very wonky. Um, but I think, if you
Okay.
what is I don't know the county as well as I know some other media markets in the state, but like thinking about what is the hyper local kind of digital first platform in Santa Barbara. I think Ed Hat is probably one of those places, right? Um,
News Hawk,
which one?
News Hawk.
Yes, thank you.
Mhm.
News
The
Talk.
Independent,
Yep.
but they also the Independent, you mentioned about, some news outlets don't wanna pick up certain stories where I just had an incident that happened to, my family member. We had a discussion, and they felt compelled to write a story in our local Newshawk Independent, and they came back to her like, "Well, we really don't wanna be involved in that kind of controversy, but the story is good enough, so we're going to go ahead and run it." So she ran into a lot of that in the feedback. But again, those local people also are very picky and choosy on what kind of stories they're going to print. So that touched base with me because it just happened. So I'm very interested to know why they do that. Is that just
It's part of the point around sort of the editorial control, right? So I was talking about it earlier in terms of corporate
right?
ownership, but sometimes they'll have particular editorial stances that they're deciding to make or not make,
Right.
and
And
that's
fear
on
of
the side.
punishment from what's happening? I mean, or not maybe punishment, but like backlash, because isn't that our right to be able to give our opinion to if they want to take that story? How do we make it voiced if they're not going to pick up our stories? That was kind of troublesome.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly the point I was making at the top of the conversation around control, right? Like, absolutely, you know, you have your opinion and you have your owned media for your organization's website. You have your social channels where you
Yes.
have control over what you're able to put out there. But when we're relying on somebody else's platform, we're negotiating with them, right?
Right.
In some ways about what they'll pick up or not.
Okay.
And so this is
I'm
the
gonna I'm gonna copy the list that you sent because I'm gonna take notes. I'm gonna really pay more attention to the outlets and be able to find that more credible because I was a little embarrassed when I thought I knew what I was talking about and just here to rely on the credibility of what I read and where I read it from. So
yeah.
I appreciate the list too,
Yeah.
and thank you for taking the time to answer me. I
Yeah,
appreciate it.
absolutely.
Uh,
Absolutely. And I think, you know, the more we can verify, if we find ourselves in a place where I'm not sure if, you know, this, like sometimes I look at a story and I'm like, this is too good to be true, right? I
mhm.
want this to be true. And
Yeah.
I have to go verify and I'm like, oh, it's not, right?
Right. So that's the credibility. So thank you very much. I appreciate that. I'll be more aware now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And I think this point around relationship building too, right? When you start to follow specific journalists or outlets that you really do trust, you can begin to build relationships with those journalists, and you may have more opportunity to pitch those opinion pieces or pitch your spokespeople once you begin to build that relationship of trust. And I think one of the best ways to do that is to be a resource, right? If a journalist calls you with a question and, you know, maybe your organization, it's like not quite what you do, you're not quite the right people to speak to it, refer them to somebody who is, right? Help them get their job done, and they're going to keep coming back to you as somebody that they can rely on and call on. I also think, you know, we should not be afraid to raise our hands in rapid response moments, right? As we're seeing news unfold in real time where that's relevant to your organization or your issue, you know, pick up the phone and call those journalists and say, hey, our ED is ready to speak to this, or hey, we have families who are affected by this that are ready to speak to you. Doing that work of presenting yourself as a source in a timely fashion when news is breaking can be a really great way to build those relationships, especially in the context of those under-resourced newsrooms, right? They don't have the person power to do the quality of journalism that once was the gold standard. And so we can sort of insert ourselves in that process and help that process along. But it takes time, right? Relationship building is an investment of time, right? Those of you who think of yourselves as organizers, this is your wheelhouse, right? Relationship building is what you do best. Um, but you know, the more you can sort of offer up your resources, your perspective, right? Editors need stories and they're looking for your expertise from your organizations, from your leaders and spokespeople. So don't be afraid to offer that expertise up because they need it. Yeah, Kim.
Speaking on that specifically, so what is personal story very quick. So I've had I started a really good relationship with one news reporter. And then when he called me like 3 other times afterwards, I had nothing going on.
Mm.
So any pointers on what you can do when nothing's going on, but you want to keep that relationship built? So yeah, any pointers on that if you are a small organization?
Yeah, in those moments where, I mean, first of all, kudos to you that the reporter was calling you, right? That's exactly what we want. They're coming to you looking for stories. I mean, I think that's a great moment to be a good ally, right? Hey, you know what? We don't have anything popping this week, but our colleagues over at thus and such organization, I know they're really working on this timely thing. You should give them a buzz. Here's their ED, here's their number, right? That's a really great time to be a good ally and share the shine. I think it's also a really good time just to have a deeper conversation with that journalist. Like, what are some of the things you're looking to cover? Let me keep my ear to the ground on your behalf. Hey, you know, I don't do that, but have you called, you know, this other organization? I know they're focused on that. So I think that's a really good time, like I said, to share the shine and kind of think with your allies and colleagues about what they might be up to. Yeah, yeah. Let's talk about crafting the pitch, right? So you've got your media list, you've done some relationship building. We know we've got to craft a pitch that includes spokespeople. No, we can go back to spokesfolks if that's the next one in the order. Sorry if I went out of order. Thank you. We know our pitch needs to include people, right? We need to humanize these stories. And so when you think about who are the spokespeople that you are pitching to the journalist, you want to think about who has a compelling take on the moment because they have a personal connection. Maybe it's professional, maybe it's family, you know, maybe they have policy expertise, right? Your policy person or your executive director is really steeped in the policy environment. You also want to think about this from the perspective of your audience. who's the best messenger for the audience? Who can the audience hear? Who will the audience relate to and connect to and find credible? So it's not just, oh, we'll put up our ED because they're the most credible person on the issue. It might also be who's most credible to the audience, right? Maybe we want to think about somebody who is more relatable, who's like our audience. So thinking through all those dimensions of spokesperson selection. And then don't don't leave your spokespeople out on their own, right? Give them some support. Do some prep work with them, right? Have they gone over your messages, right? Have you supported them to do some practice delivery of those messages? Have they had media training, right? Which is a very particular sort of set of skills to know how to turn questions back around to your message, to know how to speak in short sound bites. So give your folks some prep and some support. Don't just send them all out there on their own. And I think it's also really to the point that was being made earlier around privacy too, right? To be in the media is some exposure. And so have some conversation, particularly with community members who might be raising their hands to be spokespeople. Do some work with them to let them know, hey, this means, your face might be in TV. Hey, this means your family story might be shared. Hey, this means there might be nasty trolls in the comments, right? Are you ready for those kinds of things? I think we have some ethical duty particularly when we're elevating community members in the media to help them kind of understand what the implications of that might be for themselves, right? Are they at any professional risk if they speak out, right? What's the risk tolerance that they should be aware of and comfortable with before they emerge as spokespeople? And I see a question in the chat around some outlets that might be missing from the list. Luanda, was that the media list specifically that we dropped in the chat that we don't have those folks included on?
Yes.
Great. Kathleen, I don't know if you know those particular outlets or have any sense of why they might have been omitted, but it might have just been an omission.
We're in North County, so we like to have our media also.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Santa Maria Sun and Santa Maria Times should be on this list, Lawanda. If they're not, this is an open access document, so you can go in and add specific contact information if you have that for folks. But if for some reason you're not able to, or you'd like me to do that, just go ahead and you can put that in the chat or shoot me an email, and I'll make sure that gets on it. But yeah, this is meant to be as comprehensive of a list as possible, and is updated. It's primarily like fund folks who have updated with like, we know these journalists and we know that they're show up to our events and things. So yeah, I would encourage you, if you have personal contacts with folks and they're okay with that being shared, put that out here. Or if there's anything missing, it definitely does need a bit of a refresh. So
thank you, Kathleen.
yeah, and thanks for elevating that too. I will look into that because that should definitely be there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. Appreciate you raising that, Luanda.
Thank you, Holly.
Yeah. So once we have our list and our spokespeople and we've got all of our news hooks, then we have to think about sort of how to package it up into a pitch. And so there's a couple ways to do this, right? You might, in a breaking news moment or a rapid response moment in particular, you might have one pitch that you're going to try to share generally across your list. And that is, like I said, mostly in breaking news or rapid response moments. In general, the best practice is to create a custom pitch for each reporter, particularly when you're trying to sort of, it's not a breaking news moment, you're trying to elevate a story to get it placed. You want to think about creating that custom pitch in order to package the story for the reporter. And then once you send that pitch out, and we're going to give you a template to do that in a moment. Once you send that pitch out, you want to be persistent in following up, right? We know that people are buried under their inboxes, as are all of you every day, right? We're buried under the number of social media chat channels or platform chats we might be in, signal chats we might be in. So you want to think about following up, right? Don't be afraid to send them an email to nudge. Don't be afraid to leave a voice message to follow up, right? That persistence is often what gets a story placed. We all know the line where we've tipped from persistence to pestering. So, mind that line, but don't be afraid to be persistent in following up your pitch. So let me show you, I think we've got some samples here. This was a pitch that was sent out around a particular bit of legislation from the California Domestic Workers Association not that long ago. But what I like about this is that it kind of diagrams like all the relevant information is in at the very top, right? We're not burying anything that the contact needs to know, right? They've got it all up in the lead. We're explaining to them sort of why they should care. We're giving them some data and facts to support their story, right? They can literally pull from these pitch materials in their story. They can cite the data and the facts. And again, we're giving them more news hooks, right, with that data and facts. It gives a little bit of background, right, to help get the insider understanding on the story. And it's also showing them how you're going to make their job easier, right? We've got a visual heavy rally. We're going to give you one-on-one introductions to some workers and spokespeople you can interview, right? So you're giving them the full news package on a platter right here in the pitch. So that's just one example. And I think maybe what we want to do is actually give you some time to now craft your own. So we have created, oh no, Kathleen, I'm so sorry. Thank you. You caught it. There was the wrong link was dropped around the media list. Thank you so much for catching that and updating that. Much appreciated. There's a better link. And there's also here a better tool for helping you craft your media pitch. So what I want to offer is, I don't know, many of you, maybe you played Mad Libs when you were a kid, maybe you played it with your own kids, but it's just sort of a fill in the blank tool to help you craft a media pitch. So I'm going to drop this in the chat. We have a Google Doc, and if people want to jump on over into the Google Doc, we can see, and maybe let's stop sharing for a second and just give people a chance to get over into that Google Doc. What I want to do is give people like 10 minutes to craft their own pitch. And you can tell us, do you want to work on your own on this, or would you like to be put into a breakout room with a partner to help support you? What's the best way to do it? Like 10-minute breakout for you to work on your pitch. Do you want to work on your own, or do you want to be teamed up with a partner? No strong feelings. Okay, let's give people like 10 minutes. I will play some music, and then when we come back, we're going to want to hear your pitches, right? We want to know which reporter you chose. We want to know how you are relating it to maybe what they've covered before. So there might need to be some research to inform these pitches. And then we want to hear what you have to say about the stories that you are offering up to these reporters, right? So think about all of those elements, and maybe we can display the elements of a pitch list. Alexis, we could put that slide back up. Think about all those elements of the pitch, or maybe the news hooks. Let's put the news hooks up to help you think about how to really maximize the news value of your story. But we'll want to hear about all those things when you come back. And if I don't get volunteers, you may be in the position of being voluntold. So it's not a 10-minute break, it's a 10-minute exercise. So be warned, that we will want to hear from you when you come back. So I'll stop talking and I'll fire up a playlist, and we'll come back in a few minutes. All right, we're just about at time, and I know we've had some folks who've had to hop in and out of the room at the top of the hour, which we obviously totally welcome. Um, I'm wondering, and I see we've also had one person already volunteer in the chat, their excellent pitch. And so Amber, I'm wondering if you will come off mute and share with us what you shared in the chat. Tell us about it.
So I'm leading the merger of Santa Barbara Teen Legal Clinic with Freedom for Youth. They're both organizations that work with youth that are systems impacted here in Santa Barbara. We focus mainly in South County. And since the closure of the Los Prietos Boys Camp, there's been a fourfold enrollment of juveniles incarcerated. And the closure of the boys' camp was due to a low enrollment or incarceration rate, but we're seeing now that it's kind of hockey sticked back up. So profiling organizations and community that are working directly with these kids and trying to actually prevent the school to prison pipeline, I think is a valuable story to share. And the fact that we're merging is a new thing. It's something I think more nonprofits in town need to do instead of fighting over fiefdoms. But we want to have a very big public launch about this and have it in the media and do it right. So this was just I'm like 3 months into leading the merger, and like there's a lot of stuff on my plate right now. So I'm not quite organized enough to actually do a full media launch and public facing profile yet, but we're shooting for a calendar January 1 kind of public launch. So over the next few months, we'll be working towards that. So yeah, the Mad Lib, had limited character space, but that's basically what it says.
Yeah, no, this is great. This is great. And what I really love about is the reporter you chose.
Mhm.
Tell us more about that.
Well, Tyler is the editor-in-chief of the Independent, and this was a cover story when the camp closed.
Yep.
So
So it's an issue they're hot for.
yeah. Well, it was, yeah. I think they should be.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that is an excellent choice of outlet, right? If you have an outlet that's covered this issue, they're tracking it, they're following it, they cared enough about it to do a cover story on it, they're going to want to continue to follow the story. So I think that was an excellent choice of the reporter to choose. And so really appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah. The one thing I would encourage you to think about, right? So I would imagine that for those of you who are working with systems impacted you think that the closure of the camp was a good thing, right? Question mark? No. Okay. Tell me about why it's not a good thing.
So the camp provided, it was a much more holistic healing environment to have the kids at camp versus in jail. Santa Barbara County is one of the last maximum security prisons for youth. So it goes against our values as a community, at least what everybody publicly says, right? And so there was a lot of progress made at the boys' camp, a lot of therapeutic programming. They were learning a lot of life skills. Freedom for Youth started out in the boys' camp with a Toastmasters leadership program. That kind of, and it grew from there into a culinary arts program. They were actually using the kitchen at the camp and cooking their own food and learning, kind of all of those skills. As the population dwindled, which it should, we shouldn't, be incarcerating children to the level we have been used to. They decided the camp should have been closed. Like we couldn't justify keeping that resource open. But what we've seen in community is there's just been this now increase of incarceration of youth, and now they're in the maximum security prison. So the boys' camp was this sort of, you're incarcerated, but you're not a high violent offender. So you can go to boys' camp. And that's like a much more kind of appropriate space for you. Now we don't even have that option. So now we're putting everybody in this maximum security prison. And our programming is trying to actually divert those that are willing to be accountable for what they did. and repair and restore harm in community. We're trying to divert them from that pathway completely. And we have contracts with Santa Barbara County Probation and the school district. And that's the teen legal clinic piece of this. And then Freedom for Youth does holistic wraparound services. So we're kind of meeting the kids where they're at. We're also trying to be upriver and prevent them from even getting involved in the juvenile justice system well before they, get into some trouble. So there was a lot of advocacy to prevent the boys' camp closure, but it was a challenge because even though the kind of pitch that everybody was hearing was, well, we don't have enough kids incarcerated to justify the camp anymore. We're doing a good job. But there was a lot of nuance to that only the people who were inside knew. So, yeah, I mean, in theory, we don't want to have a big jail at all for these kids. It doesn't work but yeah, so that's the kind of story. I think there's it's not the most happy topic to bring to attention. There's a lot to it. It's a lot about social determinants of health and poverty. And, there's the county supervisors are really focused on alleviating poverty right now. Laura Capps is leading an initiative with the Urban Institute to get community engagement in that. So there's just like a lot of work going on. Like our county is really, I think, really is trying to like improve things. But this issue is kind of going under the radar a little bit.
Yeah.
So
I really appreciate the added context that like the camp actually was a thing that was doing good in the community. It's gone now. And as a result, young people are being shunted into this maximum security prison that is not appropriate for them. And so the merger of these two organizations is really, in some ways, helping to step into the breach that has been left by the closure of the camp. That's super helpful. And I think that kind of characterization of the issue and the characterization of the merger could go right into your pitch.
yeah.
Super helpful.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I appreciate it. And I see we have another volunteer in the chat, Philippa. I'm going to click into your document. I haven't had a chance to take a preview peek. I don't have access. So Philippa, if you have a chance to update the access so that we can get in there and take a look, we'd love to. But if you also want to come off mute and share it with us, we'd love to hear that too.
Hi,
Yes.
can you hear me?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm driving to an appointment.
Oh, no, appreciate you.
Okay, I'm on my phone and I couldn't really just take that link and try a format that would work like PDF. So anyway, we had a transgender rally back in, I think it was March. It was part of a unity. It was a nationwide thing, even though we weren't collectively together. And Megan Overland and a few other people from Santa Barbara Transgender Advocacy Network, as well as Michael Lynch from the Women's March. I've been with the Women's March for some time and a past SB 10 board member. Anyway, Josh Molina came out and story and photos all by himself on Newshawk. And I've been the last year I've been trying to learn how to be a better media relations person, and so this is an appropriate thing. So I do a lot of PSAs and press releases, and I create audio. I don't do video. Anyway, I sent him a letter, and that letter went in there was just to thank him and the Newshawk's editors for that, for coming out and explaining once again that they've been a good ally in the past, hope to continue, and then contact me. So that's in essence what I put.
Great.
But I wanted to make sure that the principals who are responsible for that event get acknowledged. And I put links in for them so they can, because I do get offerings sometimes for interviews, but they always contact me first on the press releases, even though I put up at attention, contact so and so.
Mm.
So I have a back and forth. So I have to, like, morning of an interview, someone will contact me. I have a KCLU, KCBX, LA Times for certain transgender and social justice events. Anyway, that's the concise part of it. Sorry, I couldn't share it. I am driving, so I will not try and do anything else.
Yes, be safe.
Thank you.
Yeah, and thanks for chiming in to share too. I really appreciate what you're doing in terms of the follow-up following an event to continue to build those relationships, right? To thank people who've been covering the issue faithfully and well, and to sort of spread credit where it's due. I think that's a really great way to continue to do relationship building and to continue to do that in a way that is appreciative of the ecosystem of allies that you're working with, right? Making sure that the media understands how you all are working together. It's a great way to help them understand kind of the 360 view on the story in terms of who in the community is working on these issues and how you're all working together. So I think that's a really great way to think about reaching out. You don't always have to reach out when you have like some hot story you're trying to pitch, right? To do that in a way that is about building relationships is also a really smart thing to do. So really appreciate that.
Oh, one other thing. Michael Lynch from Women's March, who started the first 2016 Women's March in Santa Barbara, it is really good as a building collaborations and things. It's always open to that. And we want to also, the Fund for Santa Barbara in the past has done such good capacity building work that have able to get best practices in, not only receiving grants. Luanda was part of that grant making committee, so thank you, but also to be competent in nonprofit best practices. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thanks for joining the call today and for chiming in and sharing what you're working on. I really appreciate it. I want to sort of make one more concluding point, and then I think we will have some more time for conversation. So I want to, and you just touched on this actually when you were talking about how sometimes the media comes to you. I think what I want to do is just touch on the importance of evaluating opportunities when the media comes to you. And I think we have a slide on this too, if we want to pull that up. Thank you, Alexis. In some ways, it's like it's a cause for celebration, right? When the media seeks you out and they reach out to you to request an interview or to help shape a story. But sometimes you actually have to involve some discernment, particularly, Terry, when you were talking earlier about like, I don't know if I can trust this media outlet, right? You want to make sure you are sourcing anybody who's coming to you as a legitimate media outlet, right? Sometimes, we've seen lots and lots of kind of troll podcaster types try to come and reach out to progressive organizations in order to do some kind of gotcha interview with them. That's not the greatest use of your time, and it's frankly not the audience you want to be speaking to in many cases. So we want to encourage you to think about vetting that media platform. Are they legit? Are they credible? We also want you to think about whether this platform reaches the audience you're trying to reach, right? Is this actually going to help you deliver your message to your audience toward your goals? And so always thinking about that screen, right? Is it a credible source? Does it reach the audience you want to reach? And are they coming at you with a particular slant, right? If they're coming at you to offer you a chance to be in a news story that is in no way, shape, or form going to give you a win or give you a product that you would feel proud of, it's not a great use of your time. And so want to encourage folks to really do that screening and use that discernment, right? If this outlet has a slant or an angle such that I don't think it's going to be worth our time, or it's not going to get us anywhere, if it doesn't reach an audience that's going to be open to hearing what we have to say, maybe not the best use of our time. And then I just think also like if you're looking at niche or independent outlets, does that give you an into an audience that maybe you have a harder time reaching, right? Like maybe there's a reason to lean into it if it's actually helping you reach an audience that you want to reach, right? That you want to make some inroads with. So just really weighing those questions of credibility and audience really thoughtfully before you say yes to an interview or an opportunity that comes to you. So, it's not all press is good press, right? As they sometimes say. So I think that's just a little bit of discernment to think about when the media comes to you. We spent much of our conversation today thinking about how do we get the media to come to us. But when they come on their own, what are some of the considerations we need to be thinking about? So that's kind of the one last big point I wanted to make. I think we still have a few minutes for conversation.